This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo. I'm Matt Addison with Ian Doyle, Paul Gorst and Joe Rimmer alongside me this afternoon. Welcome along to those of you who are watching us live and to those listening back later on too. On today's agenda, everything we know so far after a farcical international window, the latest injury news, a preview of Leeds United and a big weekend of Premier League football and much more too. Doyle, I'll come to you first, given that Joe seems to have gone back in with his camera. We'll start with the international football situation involving Liverpool's Brazilian players, plenty of other players as well, of course, which at the time of recording, it's not being resolved. But of course, it's only 21 hours or so until Manchester City play Leicester. They've got a couple of players in Ederson and Gabriel Jesus there. It's all just a bit of a mess, isn't it, at this point?
It's a mess in the sense that they haven't made their mind up what they're doing. I mean, that's the real issue, is that if they'd have decided like a week ago and said, right, this is what's going to happen, this is how things are going to be, I think people might have moaned a bit, but then they'd have gone, fine, well, we can get on with it. But the fact that they've left it up in the open, I mean, City, I'm right in saying City, I think their other keeper's got coronavirus, hasn't he? So at the moment, it looked like Scott Carson will be in goal, which is, I think he's about as old as I am. So it's not great for them. But I think just overall, looking at the situation, you can see why the clubs are a bit miffed, basically, because it's technically got nothing to do with them. Because you could argue, well, they could have let the players go, but then they'd let them go, but then they'd have to come back, and then they wouldn't see them again for 10 days, and then they possibly then wouldn't play again for at least another 5 or 6, because they're not just not playing; they're in a quarantine hotel. And then I'm sure we'll get onto the ins and outs of this, but if you look at Jurgen Klopp made a very interesting point in his press conference where he basically said, look, if we ask for an exemption, there'll be people who say, well, hang on, how come they get one and I can't have one? But these footballers, he pointed out, they're all living in a bubble, aren't they? They go to the training ground, they go to the match, then they go home. They don't really do anything else, and it's kind of, they're all stuck together in their place of work. It's almost like the complete opposite of us, because we're obviously all encouraged to stay a million miles away from each other, and we still are after 18 months. And for footballers, theirs is the opposite way, where they've just got to stick together, because then that kind of lessens the impact of any the virus that they might get. So from that point of view, you could see why an exemption would be ideal, but you can see why the government haven't done it, because they did it for certain events like the European Championships or the Copa America. I think they did it for Wimbledon, I think it was, and the British Grand Prix Formula One. But for everything else, they've just gone, well, this is just normal international football. We can't just keep on doing this. And the worry is that if it doesn't get sorted one way or another in the next day or two, we're just going to have exactly the same situation in October, exactly the same situation in November. So I think what people want is a bit of clarity. If they can't play the players for this game, not just Liverpool, but Leeds won't have Rafinha, as you mentioned. City and United won't have Fred, which might end up helping them actually in a way. But they'll know then, won't they? They'll go, okay, right, well, you can go, we're not going to release you again in October, and we will plan ahead now without playing for these next game or next 2 games, because it's better doing that than being without them for 5 or 6. So you can see why the clubs are, why they've done that. But ultimately, they're just in a strange position where all of this has got nothing to do with them. They would have been quite happy for the players to play for their countries, as they have been for every other player that's gone to all the other countries that aren't on red lists. So there's no issue there. But no, it's not great. It's not just affecting Liverpool, but it would help one way or another if they actually come out and make a decision in the next few hours.
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation, far from it. And before we go any further, let's have a listen now to what Jurgen Klopp had to say about it a little bit earlier on.
I have no idea when I can expect a solution. We will see. I don't know in a moment when I have to make a decision about it, to be honest. So there will be a moment today. The training session obviously would be a very important one. It would be nice to train with the team I want to play on Sunday. But we will see. 22 players on the pitch plus 50, I don't know, all together around, that they would be a risk. They are of course not. So we have to make, at one point, somebody has to make a decision. Otherwise, we just move that problem from one international break to the next. And I cannot decide that, obviously, but it's not okay that in the end, then only the players and the clubs get punished for it, because we had nothing to do with neither nor. and that's it.
Jurgen Klopp there, Gorsty, in his press conference ahead of Leeds United. I'll come to you next. I mean, it just seems very late in the day, doesn't it? And you can kind of sense the exasperation, really, from Jurgen Klopp, and rightly so at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these players are going to be training tonight. They were training yesterday and still not sure if they're going to be able to play. It's a very strange situation, isn't it? I also feel a bit sorry for Alisson and Fabinho because they're very patriotic, like pretty much every Brazilian international, absolutely love playing for the country, but haven't been allowed to because of, understandable kind of measures in place to basically stop, coronavirus spreading around the world. Brazil is one of the hardest hit nations in the world, and there are very obvious reservations for sending players around the world to go and play there, isn't it? So they haven't been allowed to do that, and basically went through a lot of, particularly Alisson went through a lot of issues with playing in the Copa America. Didn't particularly want to play in Brazil at the time. I remember rightly, I think the players put out a collective statement, didn't he, saying that we love playing for our country, so we will, but we'd ideally not be asked to do this during the middle of a global pandemic. And now they're being told that they can't play for the clubs and from the very people who they go and play for and put all their effort in towards. So it's a very strange situation. So I do feel particularly sorry for those two, and probably Alisson in particular. Both of those players actually have had a bit of a tough time, haven't they, with not being able to return back to the homeland following the respective deaths of the fathers this year as well. So it's been a very difficult situation for those two in particular. And look, if neither of them can play on Sunday, then Liverpool will have to grin and bear it, sadly, and kind of just get on with it. But from a kind of human perspective, it's been very unfair on those two. And from a sport perspective, it just seems very petty and pathetic, really, from the Brazilian authorities who've done their utmost to make sure that the Brazilian players are unable to play. So strange, surreal situation, but it is what it is. Hopefully there is some common sense that can be found.
I think that's a key point, isn't it, Joe, that no one really benefits from this. It's just a petty decision to get back at Liverpool. But the Brazilian FA don't gain anything from this. They're just stopping other teams and their own players, really, from having this weekend of football.
Whilst I agree, I think it does feel petty. I suppose the Brazilian FA would argue that they're trying to set their stall out quite early because, as Doyle alluded to earlier, this has the potential to drag on past this international break into the next one and into the ones after that. We don't know when or if this is going to come to an end, and if the UK government doesn't give football players an exemption, and Klopp set out the reasons why that might not be possible. It's going to be the club and country rows are going to continue, aren't they? So the Brazilian FA will probably say, well, we have to be strong and have to fight for our own rights, in the sense that we want these players, and what happens in October if Liverpool refuse to release again, then again in the following year. So it does feel petty, but I'm sure they've got their reasons for it, and I think there's something wider going on here. Klopp's quite outspoken in the way he feels about the football calendar. Look, none of us, I don't enjoy international football in any way, shape or form, but it always feels like international football gets the blame, doesn't it? When we talk about players playing too many games, the finger is always pointed at international football. There's too many international breaks, too many international tournaments, things like the Nations League, which feels totally useless. But the international FAs still have to function, don't they? And they still have to take part in the competitions that they're in. So they will have their own opinions and they want to fight for their own rights. So I can't, as much as I do feel it's petty, I can kind of understand why they've done it. And I think, it's something that they'll probably try and do again and again. And it's not just Brazil. I know Mexico. I've just seen that Mexico have sort of changed their minds now and allowed Jimenez to play for Wolves. But other FAs have done it, haven't they? So it might be something that they're trying to do and stay strong. And it'll be interesting in the next international break if the situation remains the same, because a lot of the European teams play in red-listed countries, and whether they'll do the same thing if Liverpool don't let the likes of Van Dijk play. Or what about Egypt, where you've got Salah and Liverpool allow them to play in one game, but in the next one, I think there's more red countries that they play in. So would Egypt say, okay, last time we sort of came to an agreement, but this time we want him, and if not, we will try and do the same thing. So it's interesting, but I think what it comes down to is, there's a bit of a club and country standoff, which I think this shows you that relationships between the FAs and clubs aren't that strong and probably need quite a bit of work.
Joe mentions there, Doyle, that Mexico seem to have rescinded their decision on Jimenez. Obviously, Everton and Richarlison were unaffected. Pep Guardiola appeared to suggest during his press conference that he thinks that his Brazilian players are going to play. Klopp said he wouldn't take the risk. Is part of the problem here the inconsistency of the application of the rule? If this was just across the board, everybody the same, would that be a little bit easier, do you think, for Liverpool fans and fans of other clubs to be able to accept it?
I think we have to bear in mind that Richarlison did play in the Olympics and Everton did let him go. So I don't really have any problems with that. So it is down to individual relationships. And the interesting point that Joe made there, completely forgotten, that the games themselves, even if there'd been no coronavirus, obviously there's the reason why this happened in terms of Brazil's last game got played this morning, like about 1:30 in the morning, our time on the Friday. If Liverpool were playing on the Saturday, there's absolutely no way any of them would have been playing anyway for Liverpool, because they couldn't have possibly come back. And even with the game being played on Sunday against Leeds, there's a very good chance that they wouldn't have, possibly Alisson would have played, but I'd be amazed if Fabinho and Firmino would have played. And I know it turns out that Firmino's injured anyway, but that's not the point. The point is that Klopp said that himself. He says the same thing's going to happen again next time, because the Brazil-Argentina game got called off, so they've got to play it sometime. So they'll end up playing 3 games again, and regardless of there being any quarantine or anything like that, you've got the same situation again. So that's more of an issue for international football. In terms of the actual application of this 5-day rule, I just think, I don't think it's so much consistency. I just think, as Joe said, it's a bit of a power play by Brazil. I don't blame them for doing it, to be honest, because they've lost most of their first choice team. And I know Klopp said, well, they won the games in the international break, but that's kind of not the point. There'll come a time where they'll play tough games and they'll end up getting beat if they haven't got the best team. That's the same for any team. It's exactly the same as what might happen to Liverpool on Sunday, for example. I'm sure if Liverpool win, they're not going to go, oh, well, that was all right then, wasn't it? It's like, no, they won't. They'll still be fuming about it. So, yeah, it is awkward, but it's just the world that we're in at the moment. And it's, it's an old phrase that we've not heard for a while, but it's unprecedented times. We haven't heard that for a while. But it still is. It still is. And this has been coming a mile off. If you could have seen it coming ages since once the 10-day quarantine rule came in, like about a month ago, we were writing about it, saying you do realise this might happen. And you look at, Joe mentioned the Egypt situation with Salah. Yeah, that is a word. It's worked. Liverpool have said we want him to play, which is why we're clearly letting him play in the game that he can play, but he can't play in the other one. It just happened to be in Egypt. I think Theo Squires has written a piece where he's looked into his crystal ball and thought, well, these are the ones that are going to still be in the red list then. And there's I think Mane is affected in the next one, and Keita will be as well for one of his games. And some of the European ones, as was mentioned, Van Dijk, I think Montenegro. So I think they're a bit different, because I think other countries might just go, well, we're not sending any of our players there, so we'll rearrange the game somewhere else, which I know is unfair in that particular case, Montenegro, but that's what they were doing last year, wasn't it? Where I think, was it Portugal? Spain played in Portugal, something stupid like that. There was quite a few games. I think Portugal played Norway and Spain, or whatever it was. It was something daft like that. There were games being played, but the difference there was no fans there, and we're seeing fans starting to come into certain grounds. Funny enough, not in Brazil. There was no one there anyway, was there, watching those games? So it's like they could have just basically played the game over here, couldn't they? Would have made a bit more sense. But Brazil are quite happy to play friendlies over in London when it's for their sponsors to help them out there. So perhaps they could have done a little something there. I don't know. Maybe that could be the answer.
Would the Brazilian officials been allowed to travel here though, with them being a red country?
They could have gone early, couldn't they? They could have come early. and done the quarantine. So this is there is more. But then Brazil would quite rightly say, "Hang on, we're Brazil. We want to play all our games at home. Why the hell should we move?" So you can see why. There is always an answer. There's always an answer to get around these things. The problem is people have their own own beliefs and their own preferences, and they don't want to give any of those up. So why should they? It's not their fault that this pandemic's going to turn around.
One of the points that Klopp made, Gorsty, was that actually we should think a little bit about the players as well. It's all right talking about Brazil as a country, but for the individual players, as you mentioned before, it's not an ideal situation for them, whichever way it would have happened. If they'd have had to have quarantined and been in a hotel, as it happens, they're now caught up in this. Sometimes you have to put them first as well, because as Klopp said, without them, the whole thing is non-existent.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, I think the whole idea of elite sportsmen quarantining for 10 days is a bit of a nonsense, isn't it? These are people who are tested 3 times a week and that's been happening to them for well over a year. And any kind of coronavirus cases that have flared up, then we quickly heard about it and they're dealt with as effectively and as safely as possible. So that for me is an absolute nonsense, and I think that will that's only ever kind of suggested by people who maybe have a bit of bone of contention with the fact that there might be 1 or 2 exemptions for certain professions. So this idea of Alisson Becker sitting in a hotel next to Manchester Airport for 2 weeks living off Rice Krispies is a bit of a nonsense for me. So I don't think that is ever going to happen.
You're more cornflakes than Rice Krispies.
So there's certain exemptions should be made for certain professions. I think that is fairly common sense. But yeah, you do feel for these players, particularly the ones who absolutely love playing for the country, and the Brazilians are certainly fall into that category. So look, hopefully that there's a more agreeable resolution for everyone in the next round of international fixtures. We certainly don't want another situation where we're coming back from the October international break and then you find out that Alisson can't play against whoever it is, Watford or
Manchester United, isn't it? I think is that one of them?
Watford.
Is it Watford? Is that November?
Watford and Atletico Madrid it would be.
Right.
So hopefully this is a little bit of a one-off, and there might even still be a late resolution, because we've seen, as Joe mentioned before, just before we started recording, that Mexico kind of happy for Raul Jimenez to play for Wolves. So if there isn't a resolution this time, let's hope that by next month there is some sort of plan in place for all parties to be happy with.
So, Gorsty, if you were stuck in a hotel for 10 days, what cereal would you have? Serious question is for everybody. Which one would you have, Gorsty?
Well, I don't think you get a choice in it. I've just had a mate who's had to do it because he was in Sri Lanka working, and he's basically been living off bananas and apples and cereal for 2 weeks.
Which cereal would you choose? Which cereal would you have?
Just avoided the question.
Yeah, I'd go with Frosties. I'm like a big kid. Frosties.
I'm 100% on board with the Frosties. Joe?
Possibly Crunchy Nut.
Yeah, Crunchy Nut's a shout, isn't it? Crunchy Nut is a shout.
Like
BRAN FLAKES as well. Put BRAN FLAKES into the mix as well.
That's
pretty boring.
Keep you regular.
It is boring. It is boring. Healthy,
by the
but
way,
boring.
Fair play to these players for getting tested, and anyone who in any profession that has to get tested regularly. I came back from France this week, so I've done 2 tests. Did the day 2 test yesterday, and I still gag every time I put the swab in my throat. And then in France, the French fella stuck the swab so far up my nose, it felt like it was coming into my brain. I was like gagging and sneezing, really struggling. And all he said to me, this humorless Frenchman, just said, "Put your head on the wall." Shut this thing up my nose. It was quite a struggle, and I felt pretty embarrassed afterwards. Tears streaming down my face. So
yeah, it's no good.
Yeah. Fair play to anyone who has to go through that 3 times a week, certainly. But we will move on then from the international football section. We will move on to, well, not quite actually, because we're going to talk a little bit about Trent Alexander-Arnold, who of course played 45 minutes for England in midfield. But in terms of Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp and Trent, from a club perspective, I'm sure we won't see that. But Joe, what did you make of Jurgen Klopp's comments? He basically said, best right back in the world.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for telling me what he said then, because I wasn't listening to anything you said because of that message that just came up on the screen. Yeah, you know what? I think we just have to quickly revisit BRAN FLAKES, because I don't think any of us really gave you enough abuse, really. But such BRAN FLAKES.
It's a terrible.
Let's do 10 minutes on BRAN FLAKES.
You're stuck quarantine in 10 days and you want to eat BRAN FLAKES. It literally, you guys will eat cardboard for 10 days. Honestly.
As Gorst said, you've got apples and bananas as well to pick from. So if BRAN FLAKES are not your thing.
So exciting, that apples, bananas and BRAN FLAKES.
That's why I went with Frosties. They're already sugared.
Yeah, Frosties is the way forward.
Yeah, I think I'd rather, Frosties far better than BRAN FLAKES. Can't believe you said that. Right, anyway, yeah. Well, Trent, Alexander-Arnold, I think Klopp just nailed it. I don't really think there's much to add to it. I still find it bizarre that we have to have this Trent in midfield debate. And again, Gareth Southgate clearly just doesn't rate him as a right back, does he? Because he's always messing around with him. And this was the latest mess. We have to mess around with him in midfield. And, it's just, it's a farce for me, the Trent debate. I just think, did we ever go, Roberto Carlos, should we play him up front? Should we play him? Or did we just accept that he was a brilliant left back and he did, he did what he did from left back? And as Klopp said, it's like almost dismissing the right back position as not being that important. And it's strange because, look, Liverpool fans know it. And anyone who's watched this team over the last few years knows how important the fullbacks are. And it's not as if Trent or Robertson, for that matter, at Liverpool, play as this sort of, traditional right back that doesn't leave his own half. He pretty much plays in midfield anyway. So this whole experiment to me is just a bit of a farce. It's a bit silly, and it's all just not really rate Trent. And if he doesn't rate Trent, then I don't agree with him. I think he's a bit mad, but that's his prerogative, and he can, he can just stick Trent on the bench, or even better, don't call him up if that's the way you feel. But I just think this squeeze him into midfield just to sort of have the debate again, and then we have to listen to Trent didn't do very well in midfield, did he? That failed. And I think, bloody hell, the fella's a right back. It's all just a farce to me, and I think Klopp nailed it today. I saw a lot of people on social media sort of reflecting that and saying, amen, Klopp has completely summed this up perfectly. But if just watching for Liverpool, he's the best right back I've ever seen play for Liverpool, and I think that just about sums it up, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of people as well, even if he had played really well, would have said, well, it's Andorra. What does it matter? What do you expect? So it was almost a lose-lose situation, really, for him in that sense. But, Doyle, we certainly won't be seeing Trent in midfield against Leeds United this weekend. Marcelo Bielsa's team, always a team that are quite interesting to look at in terms of the way they play. But they've not started the season particularly well. A 5-1 defeat to Manchester United, draws then with Everton and Burnley. What do you make of them? And should Liverpool be pretty confident of going there and winning, even though there is this kind of mystique almost about the way that they play?
I don't think they should be confident they're going to go there and win. I think this is the first time Liverpool would have played a game at Leeds with a full crowd in how long? About nearly 20 years, is it? I can't remember. 2004, yeah. So it's that 2-2 that game? I want to say 2-2. I can't remember.
There was one Dial scored on a very...
That was the League Cup game. That was before them. I was there for that one. Yeah, that was definitely before that. So it's been a long time, basically. And I think it's a game where the Leeds fans, they'll feel, I know, with the greatest respect to Everton and Burnley, they'll feel as though this is their first. In fact, Burnley was away anyway, wasn't it, when we're talking about it? So, great respect to Everton. While that was a very good atmosphere from what I've been told, certainly the game looked quite good from the highlights that I've seen. This will be the first visit of what Leeds would call perhaps one of their more historically traditional rivals. And they'll be massively up for this. I mean, they might not have Rafinha. That's probably an even bigger blow for them than it is for Liverpool missing any of their players. The three Brazilians, you might argue, because he's that good a player for them. And they'll have, the likes of Patrick Bamford will be quite up for it, given what happened to him for England. He didn't exactly, it wasn't his fault, but he'll feel as though he's got a point to prove. And Liverpool went there I was there for the game last season, which was, of course, was the European Super League day, which, that was fun. Where I think Liverpool might be a little bit annoyed, still a little bit with the T-shirt trick that Leeds pulled with that was a bit naughty, if we're being perfectly honest. And, I think that riled Liverpool, and I would imagine Klopp will mention that in his team talk before the game. They won't have forgotten that. But just looking at Leeds in general, I can't see them being, they won't struggle against relegation. It will be a more difficult season for them. It's always second season for teams that have come up. I just think the way that they play, it's quite refreshing, unfortunately, for them when they come up against teams that play like, say, for example, Man United do. They're invariably going to get beat. Although they did beat, they won City, didn't they, last season?
With 10 men as well.
And drew at home against them as well. So that underlines the threat that they've got, but it is going to be a tough one. I think we'll get down to the teams and the score predictions in a bit, but this will be just as tough for Liverpool as the Chelsea game, but in a different way.
I think the crowd is an important point, Gorsty, but I always think that the crowd can help Leeds, but it probably will help Liverpool as well in terms of the way that they play and the way that they approach this one.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is an interesting one because Liverpool have had a relatively agreeable opening to the Premier League this season. Obviously, Norwich, the crowd were absolutely up for that and created a great deal of noise, but ultimately the quality on the pitch isn't what is needed to basically match Liverpool. And then the home game against Burnley, similar kind of situation there. The Chelsea one was a little bit different because Liverpool played the second half with a man extra, and Chelsea were content to dig in and really showed their title credentials from a defensive point of view. But this one's going to be a bit different because I think Leeds are going to absolutely come flying out the tops. And as Doyle says about the atmosphere, there's probably not many teams who Leeds maybe dislike more than Liverpool. Possibly, well, obviously they have a real dislike of Manchester United, don't they? And I think Liverpool are probably not too far behind them. So I think the fans are going to be well up for it, and the players will feed into that. And we know that Leeds are high octane, in your face, smash mouth style, aren't they? And they will give up chances, but they'll look to create them as well. And I think it'll be an entertaining game for the neutrals. And then it's up to Liverpool to kind of ride the storm there and dig in when they can and defend properly, and then ultimately hope that the greater quality in the final third takes over.
There's been some suggestions today, Joe, that Liverpool looked at Patrick Bamford over the summer. Obviously, Rafinha is another player that's been linked. We don't know yet whether he'll be featuring, as we've mentioned, but it does go to show they do have some dangerous players, and Liverpool will have to be at it on Sunday.
Yeah, they certainly do. I really like Patrick Bamford. I think he's a really good footballer. And Rafinha looked very good, but obviously he might be one of the ones that misses the game. But yeah, they seem to be able to change players, and because of the style that they play in, seem to keep the same rhythm. But as Gorst said, that they are the type of team that do give up chances, and we've seen them sort of that have those big results against Man City, but get blown away by other teams. And I think the game against Liverpool, albeit behind closed doors, at the start of last season when Liverpool won 4-3, sort of summed Leeds up. They could be really dangerous, and at times Liverpool didn't really do as well as they could have done in that game, but then Liverpool banged the 4 goals in, and that was enough. So I think for Liverpool, it would just be a case of taking their chances. I think that, if they're patient and if they defend well, Leeds will give up chances, and Liverpool, if they're ruthless, which I expect them to be, they'll win the game. But yeah, I think they'll have to weather a little bit of a storm early doors, and there does seem to be a bit of needle between the two teams, both historically and because of last season. So, because the fans were a big part of that Super League thing, weren't they? The fans were at the stadium beforehand and whatnot. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting game. I've always said that I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Leeds. A friend of mine was a Leeds fan in uni, so I went to a few games at Elland Road and always thought it was a good atmosphere. Felt like a proper football club, and there's something quite like about them now. Obviously, it's hard not to like their manager and their style of play. Also, the players that they have, all very talented, technical players. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Can't wait. And I think it's one of those games that's just so hard to call. it could be a really tough test for Liverpool, but equally, I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool go there and win fairly comfortably. It's just one of those really tricky games.
Lots of other big games as well, Doyle, across the Premier League this weekend. Obviously, Leicester against Manchester City, Chelsea against Aston Villa. I'm sure Liverpool fans will be keeping an eye on those. Forget Cristiano Ronaldo. It's a big day in the Premier League, isn't it, tomorrow?
It is, yeah. And forget Cristiano Ronaldo. We definitely need to do that because, an old man comes back and plays football. We've all seen him play loads of times.
Can you come back then?
I mean, by the way, how many times has he signed for Man United in the past 2 weeks? It's like on United's Twitter feed. He's like, he signed. Here he is. He signed again. And here he is. And we're announcing his signing. Guess who's coming back? Look who's our number 7. It's like, how many times? I mean, well played to the social media team. They managed to, get every last ounce out of this before he's even kicked a ball for them again. So, in that respect, it's quite interesting. I know that me and Matt don't agree on this about the old. I know we're not talking about this, but we're going to bring it up now. The 3 p.m. blackouts, where Matt thinks it's archaic and needs to go, whereas I think good. I think it's glad this is a very good example of why it should be. Those people who bought those tickets for United against Newcastle didn't know Ronaldo was playing. They went to watch a game of football, and now they got the added bonus of actually being there in the stadium and being the one to actually see it live. So I think fair play to them. And before we go any further, is it just me, or without going all Father Ted, the door behind Joe, is that really small or is it very far away? Because it looks absolutely tiny on his screen.
I only need multiples, so they're not like it's just it's a small 3-foot door. It's like a hobbit hole. It is just a normal sized door.
Why does it look so small?
I don't know.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, whilst we're at it, why don't you like the 3 p.m. blackout, Matt? Because you're young. You're very young.
No, it's nothing to do with my age. I just think it's one of those that football fans, if their team is playing at 3 p.m. and they're not allowed to or haven't got access to go into the game, they should be able to watch it in a different way. I don't think it's massively fair that lots of other people in other countries can watch it, yet people in Liverpool that don't have a ticket can't go and watch it. And I'm just...
You still watch it back though, can't you? I think.
Of course, yeah. No, the big argument is that
you can follow it on the Liverpool Echo Live blog.
you can do honestly that. You can do that from anywhere. You can do that if it's on TV or not.
I think the Northwest is actually a good kind of concentrated area to argue why there should be a 3 p.m. blackouts, because if Liverpool and Man United, and to maybe a lesser extent Man City and Everton are playing at 3 p.m. on a Saturday, and they're not on the telly, then that affects in a positive way teams like Tranmere Rovers and Bury and Oldham and Wigan, and well, maybe not Wigan, they're a little bit further up the chain, but all these teams that have dotted about the Northwest who otherwise wouldn't be getting supporters going to the games, like AFC Liverpool, and there's loads of teams who benefit from a 3 p.m. blackout. And I couldn't believe that there was a reporter this week arguing that it should be thrown away on the basis of Ronaldo coming back, and it's unfair that we don't get to see him at 3 o'clock. Argue for it all you want, but not just because CR7 is back on the mix or whatever. I just couldn't believe it.
The disdain in your voice it filled me with joy, to be honest.
I don't know. I don't think they bought him in any kind of football and ideology. They're not thinking, well, if we get him in between the 6-yard box and get balls into him and play off him and all. They bought him because he's going to do massive social media numbers, and then everything else. It's the same reason they buy Cavani, and same reason they buy a big name player every summer, just because of what he can bring to the social table. And Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is not going to say no, is he? As a manager, if Ed Woodward comes up to him and says, "Oh, Matt Judge, do you want Ronaldo? Do you want Cavani?" He's not going to say no, is he? It just seems
the idea that they've made the money back in shirt sales already is complete nonsense as well.
Yeah,
I think we should say that.
Anyway, but that's another thing completely.
I'm sure we'll change our tune when he scores his 5th goal against Newcastle on Saturday. God, I wish I'd have been able to see it.
To be fair, though, something I always loved about whether you went the match or not, but if you went the match, you'd see the goals live, and then I mean, obviously now you don't really have to wait anymore, but I used to love waiting to match the day to watch them again later on. Or if you know, I used to love it when matches were on the radio and you could listen to it on the radio and then wait. You'd sort of picture the goals in your head and then wait and see them on match the day later on. But fair enough. I see your point, Matt, but you're wrong.
Yeah, let's not get started on match of the day. We've had that debate before as well, but we'll move on.
Rid of that as well.
You want rid of match of the day?
I don't want rid of it. I just, I think it's easier to watch the highlights straight away on other platforms.
The youngsters today want it now. Imagine it was to record this podcast 5 days ago. You know what I mean?
Anyway, we'll move on from Ronaldo, BRAN FLAKES, and all the rest of it to our team selections.
Can we go back to the BRAN FLAKES, please?
No, we cannot. We're going to talk about the team, and we're going to move on to that very, very quickly because we are running out of time. But in terms of the goalkeeper, it will be Alisson, unless he can't play, in which case it will be Quibin Kelleher. But Doyle, you're back for?
I think it'll be Trent, who is not a midfielder. I think it's a tough one, really. I'm still going with Matip. And I'm still going with Van Dijk. But I think Tsimikas will play left back.
Interesting. Gorsty, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I've seen Robertson playing against someone earlier this week. It wasn't France, was it? He played anyway. Tsimikas played as well, didn't he? And by all accounts, seemed to play well. I'm going to stick with Robertson. I think Tsimikas can come in for your Brentfords and your Crystal Palace, possibly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Robertson plays the first two, and then it's Crystal Palace, isn't it, next weekend? So I think we might see Tsimikas in that one. Joe, who are you going to go for?
Yeah, I think I'd go for Robertson as well, just because I think he's slightly more reliable defensively, and I think Liverpool will have to be on their guard defensively in this one. And like you say, there's different games going forward. You can get Tsimikas involved in. There's a League Cup game that I think he's almost certain to play in. So, I was really impressed with Tsimikas in the first couple of games, but I don't see the reason you need to rotate Robertson right now. Anyway, I think later on in the season perhaps, but certainly right now, I think he can play the league games and you can get Tsimikas involved in the League Cup and every now and again otherwise.
Yeah, it might have helped him a little bit with a bit of rhythm and match sharpness as well, having those games in the internationals. Dory, we'll move on to midfield again. The obvious caveat over Fabinho, but with or without him, who are you going to pick?
Well, I actually don't think any of the Brazilians will be playing it. I don't think they'll play them. I just don't think it's too late now, I think. So I think I'll go with Henderson. I'll go with Thiago. I'll go with Keita.
Yep, I'm with you with that. Gorsty?
Yeah, I seem to remember Thiago having a good game against Leeds back in April, was it? So there's no Fabinho. I'll bring him in alongside Henderson. And is Milner fit?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Milner just ahead of Keita. I think it might be time to give Harvey Elliott. Well, Elliott's injured actually, isn't he? Yeah, I'll go with Milner over Keita.
I think Elliott was in training, wasn't he, earlier in the week?
How was he?
Joe, are you going to go for Elliott, Joe, or go with him maybe off the bench?
Yeah, if Fabinho doesn't play, then like the guys, I go for Thiago and Henderson. I think I'm going to go for Keita because I think there's going to be a bit of space because I think Leeds will press Liverpool, and if Keita can get out, then yeah, I think I'll go for Keita.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely an argument for him, possibly Oxlade-Chamberlain as well. It might be a game that suits him. But in terms of the front three, Doherty, obviously Roberto Firmino isn't going to be there. So is it just a case of Jota, Salah, Mane?
Well, there's Origi, don't forget. So it'll be Jota up front with Mane one side and Salah the other.
Yep, no shout for Origi for you, Doherty. Gorst even?
No.
Origi is the BRAN FLAKES of those front three.
I think about Origi, he'll be playing some games in the next couple of weeks, guaranteed. He'll play against Norwich. He'll play against Norwich. He could have been get on in the next couple of games as well, I think so.
Would Minamino not come on ahead of Origi?
Is he not injured?
Oh, yes.
I think he misses this one, doesn't he?
Yeah,
for this one, yeah.
And I feel slightly harsh for calling Origi BRAN FLAKES. I think that's actually harsh on Origi. So
I don't think BRAN FLAKES ever scored a Champions League final.
No, I don't think they have a glorious.
It's far too exciting for it. No. Maybe just scoring an equaliser in the League Cup third round replay when they used to have them. That'll be more like a bit more BRAN FLAKES, that one.
BRAN FLAKES is known for just playing a lot of games in the Championship. I don't think BRAN FLAKES is in the Premier League.
When he finally leaves Liverpool, he'll have the strangest career arc of anyone ever. I feel
BRAN
like
FLAKES, are we talking about?
Flakes double 12 on the
back. Right, I have no idea where we're up to here. Joe, have I asked you for a front three or?
Well, it's not going to be Salah one side, Mane the other, and BRAN FLAKES through the
middle. Right, well, we will see whether any of us are correct on Sunday. But before we do finish, we'll go for a score prediction. I'm going to go for a 3-1 Liverpool win. I think there'll be a few goals. We'll go in the same order. So, Doyle, I'll go to you first.
A very non-BRAN FLAKEY 2-2 draw.
Ooh. Gorsty?
I think every point is massive now, isn't it? I think Liverpool going to go with 2-1.
And Joe, just to finish us?
Yeah, with Gorst, a very nervy 2-1 win.
It should be, yeah, a good game, I think. And we'll be back, of course, on Monday with the next Blood Red podcast, looking back on Leeds and ahead to that huge game with AC Milan next midweek. Plenty more to come before then as well, of course. If you haven't already, make sure you go over to www.bloodredpodcast.co.uk to sign up for our Blood Red Club. Even more exclusive Liverpool content on there, available only to members, and it's completely free. But from myself, Matt Addison, Ian Doyle, Paul Gorst and Joe Rimmer, until next time, it's goodbye.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.